The iron mask never came off, not during meals, not during sleep, not during the most intimate moments of his life. For 34 years, the most mysterious prisoner in French history lived behind a face of black velvet and steel. His identity, so dangerous that revealing it would have toppled the throne of France itself. This isn't a story from fiction. This is the documented case of a man whose very existence was considered such a threat to European stability that he was erased from history while still alive. Today, you'll discover the true identity of the man in the iron mask, the horrifying reason he was hidden from the world, and the conspiracy that involved the highest levels of French royalty. You think you know royal secrets? You think you understand the depths of political conspiracy? What you're about to discover will redefine your understanding of both power and identity. Because in 17th century France, some truths were so dangerous that they required a human being to be buried alive, behind a mask for decades. But to understand why this man's face was too dangerous to be seen, we must first enter the glittering world of Versailles. The court of Louis XIV was the most magnificent spectacle in European history. Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a carefully orchestrated theater where every gesture, every word, every glance carried political significance. The Sun King had created a world where appearance was everything, where the slightest deviation from protocol could mean social death or political ruin. Louis XIV's absolute monarchy was built on the foundation of divine legitimacy. He didn't just rule by right of conquest or inheritance, he ruled because God had chosen him to be the earthly representative of divine will. This wasn't merely political propaganda, it was the fundamental organizing principle of French society. The king's bloodline was sacred, his authority unquestionable, his person literally holy. The elaborate ceremonies of Versailles reinforced this divine status every day. The king's morning rising was a religious ritual attended by the highest nobles in France. His meals were served with the reverence of communion. His very presence was considered a blessing that courtiers competed to receive. The entire machinery of French government operated on the assumption that Louis XIV was not just a king, but a semi-divine being whose authority came directly from God. This system of absolute monarchy was incredibly fragile, precisely because it depended on the fiction of divine legitimacy. If the king's bloodline could be questioned, if his divine appointment could be challenged, if his sacred authority could be undermined, the entire structure of French society would collapse. The man in the iron mask represented exactly this kind of existential threat, but the prisoner who would challenge everything wasn't. Born in a dungeon, he was born in a palace. The first hints of the conspiracy that would create the man in the iron mask appeared in the summer of 1638, when Queen Anne of Austria gave birth to the future Louis XIV after 23 years of childless marriage. The birth was celebrated as a miracle, but whispers in the court suggested something more complicated was happening behind the scenes. What most historians overlook is that Queen Anne didn't give birth to just one child. That summer she gave birth to twins. The second child, born minutes after the future Sun King, was immediately whisked away from court under circumstances so secret that even the royal physicians were sworn to silence under penalty of death. The existence of a twin heir created an unprecedented crisis for the French monarchy. According to French law, the firstborn son inherited the throne. But what happened when the births were so close that determining the first became impossible? More dangerous still, identical twins would have identical claims to divine legitimacy, creating the possibility of civil war between two equally valid kings. Cardinal Mazarin, the chief minister who effectively ruled France during Louis XIV's minority, made the fateful decision to hide the second twin rather than risk a succession crisis. The infant was removed from court and placed in the care of trusted guardians, his existence denied, his birth records destroyed, his very identity erased from official history. But secrets this dangerous have a way of refusing to stay buried. As the hidden twin grew to adulthood, he began to realize that his noble upbringing, his royal education, and his uncanny resemblance to the King of France might mean something more than coincidence. The transformation of a secret prince into a masked prisoner began in 1669. The hidden twin, now a grown man of 31, made the fatal mistake of attempting to claim his birthright. He had been raised in secrecy by noble families loyal to the crown, educated as a prince, and told carefully crafted lies about his parentage. But by his 30s, the truth had become impossible to ignore. The resemblance between the hidden twin and Louis XIV was so striking that anyone who saw them together would immediately recognize the relationship. They shared not just physical features, but mannerisms, speech patterns, and an unmistakable royal bearing that couldn't be taught or faked. The hidden twin was in every measurable way, as much a king as the Sun King himself. The crisis came when the secret twin attempted to present himself at court, claiming his rightful place as Louis XIV's brother and heir. He had gathered supporters among nobles who were dissatisfied with the Sun King's absolute rule, and he possessed documents that proved his royal birth. The conspiracy wasn't just about one man's identity. It was about creating an alternative center of power that could challenge the entire system of absolute monarchy. Louis XIV's response was swift and merciless. Rather than risk the political upheaval that would come from publicly acknowledging his twin's existence, he chose to make the man disappear entirely. But killing a twin brother, a man who shared the same sacred blood, was spiritually impossible. For a king who believed in divine legitimacy, the solution was far more creative and infinitely more cruel. The moment the secret twins' fate was sealed came when Louis XIV made the decision that would define both their lives. His brother would be kept alive, but hidden forever. His identity erased, his face concealed, his very existence denied. Man in the Iron Mask was born not from cruelty, but from a twisted form of royal mercy. The mask itself was a masterpiece of psychological torture. It wasn't actually made of iron. That was a later embellishment that made the story more dramatic. The real mask was black velvet lined with steel, designed to completely conceal the wearer's features while allowing him to breathe, eat, and speak. It was elegant enough to maintain royal dignity while ensuring absolute anonymity. The conditions of the masked prisoner's captivity were unlike anything in the history of imprisonment. He was treated with royal courtesy, served meals on silver plates, dressed in fine clothes, provided with books and writing materials. His guards were instructed to address him with respect due to a nobleman, but if he ever attempted to remove the mask or reveal his identity, he would be killed immediately. The most cruel aspect was how the mask preserved the secret while destroying the man. His face was hidden, but his royal bearing remained visible, creating endless speculation about his identity. The most disturbing aspect of his captivity is how his guards were instructed to treat him. They were told that he was a nobleman of the highest rank who had committed unforgivable crimes against the state. They were ordered to show him respect while maintaining absolute security. This created a bizarre dynamic where the prisoner was simultaneously feared and revered by his captors. The psychological torture was refined to an art form. The prisoner was allowed to write letters, but they were all intercepted and destroyed. He was permitted to speak to his guards, but they were forbidden from responding to any questions about his identity or the outside world. He could request books, but only those that had been carefully censored to remove any references to current events or royal affairs. The most cruel detail was that the prisoner was occasionally allowed to see his reflection in mirrors or windows, forcing him to confront the mask that had become his permanent face. He lived for decades knowing that somewhere in the world, another man who looked exactly like him was being celebrated as the greatest king in French history. The mask didn't just hide his identity, it created a living death that was worse than execution, the death of the man in the iron mask in 1703 triggered an immediate and systematic campaign to erase any evidence of his existence. His body was buried in an unmarked grave, his few personal possessions were burned, and his cell was thoroughly searched and cleaned to remove any trace of his identity. The guards who had served him were either transferred to remote posts or pensioned off with generous payments and strict instructions never to speak about their former prisoner. The prison governors who had overseen his captivity were rewarded with promotions and lands, ensuring their continued silence. Even the craftsman who had made the mask was quietly eliminated to prevent any future revelations. The immediate political consequences were significant but carefully managed. The prisoner's death removed a potential threat to Louis XIV's legitimacy, but it also eliminated the possibility of ever definitively proving or disproving the various conspiracy theories that had grown around his identity. The mystery became more powerful than the truth. The psychological impact on Louis XIV was profound. He had successfully protected his throne by hiding his twin brother, but the moral cost of keeping a man masked for 34 years weighed heavily on his conscience. Contemporary observers noted that the Sun King became increasingly obsessed with questions of identity and legitimacy in his final years. This reveals something fundamental about the relationship between power and identity. When authority can control not just what we do, but who we are, when it can literally hide our faces from the world, the line between existence and non-existence becomes terrifyingly thin. The man in the iron mask lived in a state that was worse than death. He was dead to the world while still alive. The story teaches us that identity isn't just about who we are inside, it's about being recognized, being seen, being acknowledged as real by others. The mask didn't just hide the prisoner's face, it erased his entire existence from the world. He became a ghost in his own life, shadow of a person who had once been a prince. The prince who wore a mask his entire life teaches us that the most profound form of tyranny isn't the power to kill, it's the power to make someone disappear while keeping them alive. Sometimes the cruelest punishment is being forced to exist without being allowed to live.